Welcome to the aggressive life. You know, a lot of times we think about aggression is just making really bold moves. Maybe it's a physical challenge. Maybe it's an occupational change. Maybe it's a financial investment. All those things are good. All those things we should have an aggressive attitude towards. But what about friendship? I mean, friendship just sounds kind of soft. It sounds soft, but it isn't soft. How many friends do you have? What is a friend? How'd you find your friends? The answer to questions like those tends to be influenced by two factors: your age and your gender. The older we get, the fewer friends we all tend to have, and studies also routinely show that men are disproportionately more lonely and isolated than their female counterparts. In fact, one study found that nearly half of all men reported having no friends, zero, nada, none that they felt comfortable discussing serious matters with, things like money, work, or life health issues. You know, I believe the biggest pandemic in the world, the longest running pandemic in the world, the most lethal pandemic in the world is loneliness. And it's leaving a path of destruction in its wake: substance abuse, self-harm, mental health issues. And that's where our guest comes in today. I love when I have people on the Aggressive Life Dirt who know more than me, which is about everybody.
Yeah, that's right.
It's about.
It's good to have an expert.
Yeah, it's about everybody, and especially in this one, because this has kind of been a stump speech for mine for a while. Men are 4 times more likely to have suicide than are women. 3 times more likely to have mental illness than women. 2 times more likely to have a health abuse-related incidents than women. And my little pet theory has been this loneliness. My pet theory has been the fact that men simply are not connected with one another. So whether you're male or female, you're going to get something out of today. Today, our guest is author, playwright, comedian Max Dickins. He proposed. Actually, I shouldn't tell you what he did. I shouldn't tell you his story. Why don't we have Max tell us his story? Max Dickins, welcome to the Aggressive Life.
Hey, I'm so glad to be here. Thanks for having me, Brian.
Oh, man, you're welcome. So tell us the story about how you got so interested in friendship.
Yeah, well, I got into it because of a personal revelation, I suppose. What happened was I was thinking of, or I was planning on proposing to my girlfriend, Naomi, and I was in Hatton Garden, which is the jewelry district of London. I was literally in a shop shopping for an engagement ring with a female pal of mine. And afterwards, we go to a pub and she says to me, "So, Max, who are you going to have as your best man?" And I sort of mind blanked and just thought it was one of those things in the moment where you just can't think of anything. So I went home that night and I got a piece of paper out and I wrote a list of all these men I might consider as best man. And I looked at this list and I realized, gosh, I work with most of these guys and they'd find it really weird if they asked me, if I asked them, I should say, to do this role for me. And then the rest on this list were people I hadn't seen in some occasions for 2 or 3 years. And I thought, oh my gosh, I've lost all my friends. How has this happened to me? And I did a bit of light Googling in that moment, that evening, and I realized that actually this is a problem lots of men have. And I decided to try and work out why it happens so I could find the best man and work out what men can do about it too.
Yeah, not because you want a friend, you just wanted a best man. Like if you, not a friend, I just need a best man, someone to fill the role.
Well, that's a good point, because maybe I did think like I just want to fill a role at the start. Maybe it was like a kind of a classic masculine thing. I want that to complete the set. You know, you have your nice car, you have your job, you have your best man in the photos at the wedding. But then as I went through it, I realized actually, oh no, I do need friends and I do have to change in order to get those male friends. But I think maybe what people have found relatable about my journey in this is if you meet me and you look at me, I'm not what loneliness looks like. I'm, my early mid-30s. I'm a pretty outgoing guy. I'm quick to the bar to buy my round. Loneliness is not meant to be guys like me, and yet there's lots of men like me who are in exactly the same position.
So you got a new book coming out called Billy No Mates, How I Learned Men Have a Friendship Problem. You're over in the UK. Man, every time I hear that sexy UK accent, I want one of those. How do I get an accent like that? Can I just? It's you know that you have Americans like me in the palm of your hand whenever you open your mouth and speak. You do realize that, right?
Well, thank you. You can learn it. I think you can go to like a accent coach and learn what they call RP English. But do you know what? I think the US accent, you guys sound more chilled. So I always sound maybe quite grand and or authoritative, but maybe a bit boring, whereas you guys sound relaxed and sort of charismatic. So it's a trade-off, I reckon.
Oh, is that right? So the English accent to you sounds relaxed and charismatic.
No, I think the American accent does.
Yeah, I'm sorry, the American accent, yes. American is English. Come on, American. America, number one, baby. No, anyway, I love the accent. I have a couple friends who have New Zealand or Australian or English accents who are pastors. I'm like, dudes, if I could double the size of my church like in a year if I just had your accent in America. Anyway, it's good stuff. So, Max, it seems to me like, well, first of all, your book and your research and going on. So just tell us, why is it that us as men, we don't have great friends? I know a lot of guys do believe that they have great friends, but studies show, or at least studies are my anecdotal evidence, I'm not sure which it is, it seems like those friends that we have are memories of friends from high school or college, or they're the people we work with, and as soon as we leave and go to another job, we've got loneliness. Why is this? When did this start with us? Has this always been a case in the Western Hemisphere?
Yeah, so you're kind of anecdotal evidence there. There's a lot to that. So a lot of men, a lot of their friendships tend to revolve around work or around their wife or their girlfriend's friends. But so when I looked into this, men basically have two problems when it comes to friendships. The first one is, well, we might have a lot of what you might call mates. So mates you might go and watch the football with or go to the bar with. We don't have many friends, so sort of intimate friends. So you said in your intro there was a recent study by Movember that found that half of men, when they were asked to think of someone they could talk about something serious with, so relationship worries, health worries, money worries, half of them could think of no one at all. So we might have those mates, those pals, but close, intimate friendships. Men tend to struggle with that, especially compared to women. And the second thing that men struggle with friendship is, as we get a bit older, our social network shrinks. And it's the same with women as well. Like your social life peaks in your late 20s. That's what the social network research suggests. But it gets a lot worse for men. So if you actually look as men get older, they have a bigger social network than women in their 20s. When they're in their 40s, that's flipped on its head, which is often why when men get bereaved or they get divorced or they retire, they have worse mental and physical health outcomes than women because they are more isolated, and it gets worse as we get older. Now, the question is, I suppose, why? Because this has been existing since the early 70s when I went as far back in the research. So it's not a modern invention. This has been around for a long time.
The 70s, the 70s is when this started then.
Yeah, like the early 70s was when they started measuring it properly. And since then, men have had a worse deal on friendships than women. So I just thought, wow, what a kind of juicy question to get into.
So what happened in the 70s then?
Well, I think it's just when social scientists decided to start measuring it. So maybe it goes back earlier than that. When I looked at what's been going on, there's basically maybe three broad theories, but two theories are probably the thing that we should focus on in terms of the causes of this loneliness crisis in guys. So, well, the first one is, and maybe I should introduce it by a kind of little anecdote, is that I never thought that I was different with guys than I was with women, right? How I went about being a guy. And then Naomi, who I told about this problem, like, I'm worried I haven't got any male friends, what's going on? We went to this party together, and then on the way back in the car, she says to me, Max, do you realize what you like with other guys? You turn into this different person. Your kind of body language gets more like aggressive, and not aggressive in the way you mean. I mean literally more belligerent. You kind of talk louder. Your jokes get crueler. You start talking about yourself more. You become this different animal. And I'm like, oh wow, do I? And she said, yeah, but you never show those guys the side I know about you. Like you become this different guy. And what I love about you is maybe they never see that side of you. And I was like, oh wow. And then when I spoke to loads of psychologists who studied this stuff, they said to me that one of the big reasons men have less close friendships than women is these kind of unspoken rules about how we go about being men, what they would call norms of masculinity, that maybe get in the way of us having these closer bonds. So like a classic one is what we might say in the UK is banter, right? Which is this kind of joshing, this jazz of casual brutality we have when we're with the guys. We sort of run each other down, but in a fun way, making lots of jokes. And that can be fun, but maybe that creates a moat around us. We can't get too close. Another thing is there's like a maybe connected, but a taboo against anything too deep when you're with the guys. It's meant to be fun. It's meant to be frothy. You don't want to go there or get too serious. We don't like to be needy or show affection either. I realized like I never would tell the guys in my life that I even liked them, let alone that they were really important to me. So these little rules that we have, and maybe we don't even realize, I certainly didn't, get in the way of forming those closer bonds that women often benefit from.
Yeah, I've just wondered, has America always been like this? I don't think so, right? Or I keep saying America. You're in England. First, let me ask that.
Yeah.
Do you think the situation in America is the same way it is in England, or do you think we're on different paths on different continents?
So, I mean, that's a really good question. So, on the one hand, there's this. So, that research I spoke about that began in the 70s, measuring friendships, a lot of it is US based. So, this is not a British story. It's not a European story. It's very much a global story. And a lot of these statistics are replicated around the world. But then, is it different in the UK or Europe compared to the US? Well, I think these kind of norms of masculinity, these behaviors that we associate with what it is to be a, inverted commas, real man, maybe they do vary a little bit from culture to culture. But I think in the Western cultures like Australia, like the US, like the UK, I think a lot of this stuff is pretty similar. But it's interesting. What you say is like a lot of this stuff is averages and generalizations. So there'll be different, you guys might be listening to this and going like, hey, I got loads of friends. I don't know what you're talking about. And that's absolutely fair enough. But if you actually look at the statistics, on average, men are more lonely and more isolated than women.
I'd love to know how far back this goes. I know growing up, there was all kinds of things that were available that men would do that they just don't do anymore.
Yeah.
Softball leagues, bowling leagues, elks, the elks, Shriners, there's just a bunch of things like that. Well, people would also go to church, and there's a bunch of things in the social fabric that are gone, and it seems to me like we're sitting in our rooms looking at our screens more. Is that too simplistic? What do you think?
So this is massive, Brian. So I'm really glad you said all that stuff. You're absolutely bang on. But the thing where it gets interesting, I think, here, or even more interesting, is that this stuff is worse for men and affects men worse than women for this reason, okay? So this is maybe going to get onto I said there were kind of two main theories. We're going to touch on the first one. The second theory is this, and I am going to come back to the points you made there because I think they're really important. So the second theory is not about what you would call gender or culture, how men are brought up or socialized to behave or how they behave in relationships. I spoke to evolutionary anthropologists, evolutionary biologists. The most famous one is a guy called Dr. Robin Dunbar. He's like the most famous friendship researcher in the world. And he says that fundamentally men are very different socially to women. Here's the difference in a nutshell. And this goes back deep into our evolutionary past. Male friendships tend to be side by side. They're often in groups, and they're based around sharing activities, so doing stuff together, sharing space activities. Female friendships generally tend to be face-to-face, based around talking and sharing a lot of emotional kind of content. So fundamentally, they look different. Men and women have different preferences. So this is borne out by what makes male friendships succeed or what makes them easy. So men need to be in spaces doing stuff. But now let's go back to what you just said there. What has gone in the last 20, 30 years in decline is these spaces that existed for guys. So, whether it be going fishing or the softball league, the bowling league, churches. So sociologists call these spaces third spaces. So first space is work. The second space is like home, right? In the middle, third spaces. There used to be loads of these. Friendship was easier And now they've been taken away, or we've decided not to show up with them, like you say about staring at screens. And this is really getting in the way of men having the sort of friendships they prefer and maybe that come naturally to them.
I like that, side by side. Yeah, it's when men are doing things together. I'm one of the weird ones. I've got a really, really rich relational life. And as I've thought about this, I think the reason is I've opted into hobbies that if they don't require other people certainly make them richer. And then there you go. You have a number of people who just don't have hobbies. They don't have any hobbies. Like this last week I went down, me and, is this a couples? We had 5 couples, and I'm friends with all the guys who were in it. And we did some extreme off-roading and overlanding, camping. Yeah. And we were saying afterwards, we went through huge, massive mud bogs. And at one point, one guy got stuck in the mud, and, and he can't get his vehicle out. He needs somebody else to pull him out. I said, if it was just my wife and I would never try any of this dangerous stuff because I'd be on my own. So I'm in these things, motorcycles the same way, that actually requires other people. But do you think that's part of it? We're not doing anything that requires other people?
Yeah, big time. So hobbies I think is a great thing to kind of call upon there. So I asked that guy, Dr. Robin Dunbar, I said to him, if you could give me one bit of advice, what would that advice be? And he says, join a club. Now, I know you've maybe not joined clubs for that, but it's the same vibe, right? So do stuff with people who like stuff that you like. And then these friendships occur more naturally. It's not about going out and deliberately going, I'm on a friend date. It's going, I'm doing things I love to do, and I'm going to meet people along the way or share this with them. But I think you used a really, your example is brilliant there. What did you have in that long weekend was adventure, right? And risk. Right. And I think so often as we get older, I know this is true of me. Like when I was in my teens, my 20s, I get out there and I do stuff, and I'd be at the front line of life, right? Like you say, taking risks, but doing things that excited me. And the friends just kind of grow on you like a suntan, right? There's this guy called C.S. Lewis, who's obviously a very famous novelist, but he said friends, they're not looking at each other. They're side by side looking into the distance. We need a spot on the horizon we're moving towards. So I think this is a really great kind of fit with aggressive life for me. When I was thinking about coming on your show, it's like, if you live aggressively, you're going to get people who come along with you. And this is, and it's going to make it a lot more juicy to have those people with you, but they're mutually beneficial to each other, the friendship and the adventures.
That's great. Interesting to bring up C.S. Lewis. He's one of the greatest Christian apologists over in England, Oxford. What was his specialty? His specialty was pre 1800 literature or something like that. He read every single thing was ever written. Kind of crazy. I don't know if you ran across this in your research of him, but one of the things I always found interesting about him was those who know him or are Christians, they really geek out on his arguments, which I think are somewhat persuasive. But really what I find also fascinating is, I guess he was with 3 folks that he would do beers with in the pub every week. Are you familiar with that? I think J.R. Tolkien, J.R. Tolkien, somebody else, and he said when one of them died, and he felt like when he lost that friend, he didn't just lose that friend, he lost knowing J.R.R. Tolkien, because that friend brought something out of Tolkien that he wouldn't have seen otherwise.
Yeah, so absolutely. So I think the way he puts it is something like, when there's A, B, and C, we all get different sides of each other because your B is reflecting me as A, and C gets to witness that, and then all those different relationships. So their group was called the Inklings, and you're right, Tolkien was one of them, and I don't remember the other dude either.
I know. They're a bunch of losers. They don't write anything. They didn't do anything that went into a movie. Bunch of freaking losers. They could slam some beers, though.
Yeah. He would. He's got an amazing writing about friendship in a book called The Four Loves, and it's a short book. I really recommend it. And obviously, he's a very famous Christian, as you say. But his kind of whole thing was that friendship needs to be about something. So I don't want to kind of ruin his beautiful phrase making, but he said something like the phrase of opening friendship was something like, oh, you too. I thought it was just me, right? You kind of get the sense of you have this mutual quest or question you're trying to answer or thing that you're really into. And it's about that. And once you lose the thing that it's about, that's when the friendship dissipates, it drifts. And I think when I spoke to men researching this book, and I spoke to thousands of men, they would say, on the one hand, some were genuinely isolated and genuinely lonely, but a lot of them mainly felt sort of this quiet grief that they still had these pals from college, from school, from their hometown. But what made those friendships rich had gone because it was about is left, it's dissipated. And this sense of the people being there, but not really. And like that was like the kind of the more quiet sadness of it. And I think a lot of guys can connect to that and relate to that. I know I certainly did.
Wow, that's interesting. So, yeah, even if I look back on those previous friendships, it was the thing we were doing. Yeah, that's good. So, Max, I'm sure this bounced back and forth for you between the research you did and the experts you spoke with and then your own story. What kind of choices did you make pre-rich friendship that you think contributed to your not being able to have a best man?
So the first thing was, it wasn't even on the dashboard of my life, if you like. It wasn't even something I would measure. Like I'd have an Excel document with like January to December with every bit of income, every bit of expenditure. I'd manage that to death. I'd have a diary that was scheduled to death, but I would never think about scheduling anything social because, to be quite honest with you, I wasn't prioritizing it. It wasn't important to me. I didn't see it as important to my life or to my own identity. I was being more materially successful in however you define that material, for me, was what I was obsessed with. And it meant that I didn't prioritize this stuff. And I didn't realize I was doing it until it got to that pinch point. There are some pinch points, I think, in your life where you're forced to audit your social world. Like one is like when you're trying to get a best man if you're a guy, or when you're drawing up a wedding invite list, or sometimes, sadly, it could be a funeral, whatever it is. And I went, oh, wow, now I've looked at it, I've realized that the cupboard's pretty bare. And it was, for me, in a sense, hard to spot because, like I said, I don't look like the classic lonely guy. I was busy with work. I was busy maybe hanging out with some of my girlfriend's friends, busy with family stuff. And it was only when these pinch points came up, I was like, oh, wow, there's nobody there. When the going gets tough, there is no one there.
In your book, you cite research that says that loneliness is worse for your health than smoking 15 cigarettes a day, worse than excessive drinking, lack of exercise, and being obese. Really? I'll put this way. Are you saying that if I have a rich relational life, I can be on par having 15 smokes a day?
This is what the research shows. Look, it's
God
nuts.
bless America. God bless America. And God bless England as well. God bless all of you people. That's wonderful.
Yeah, so guys, if you're listening to this, you get a few mates, you can get on the beers. This is a good side. So look, when I read it, I was like, you had the same reaction, like, what? This can't be real. But there's tons of evidence. It's not like one piece of research. There's tons. So if you want to even check it, if you're listening to this, Julia Holt-Lundstad, or Lundstad as she's known, is a scientist who's looked at this, done a huge what's known as a meta review. So like hundreds and hundreds of pieces of research into this. And yeah, the research shows that 15 fags a day, being chronically obese, drinking a lot, these have the same negative health effects as not having friends, as being lonely. So it's you can't really argue against it. It's probably the worst thing for your physical health is to not have a decent social life. And also, then you've got the mental health. You mentioned, Brian, in your intro, the kind of suicide rates of guys is way worse than it is for women. And there's lots of research that loneliness is very closely correlated with depression, which often sadly ends in suicide. Also, the Samaritans are a big suicide prevention charity in the UK. they do an annual suicide report. They consistently say that one of the biggest risk factors in male suicide is isolation. Why? Because you get this big build effect. If you don't have outlets to share some of the very difficult experience and thoughts you're having, there's a big build effect, and then the risk is you act out, you do something terrible about it, and then don't want to talk about depression and talk about like the juice of life, like happiness. Again, the findings are unambiguous, right? If you look at studies of people over time, the number one thing that is linked to whether they rate their lives as happy and meaningful is the number of close friendships and relationships they have. So it's kind of a no-brainer, which makes it even madder that people like me didn't think it was important.
So why are we not doing this then? Is it a generational thing? Do you think older generations are better or worse than younger generations? It seems like the younger generation, I'm talking about Gen Z, it seems like they're saying, "Hey, I don't want to work 80-hour weeks, at least in America. I don't want to even be beholden to an organization. I want to enjoy my life and hang out with my friends." At least that's what I hear. Is that happening more with Gen Z than it is, say, the boomers?
Yeah, well, you're right that the Gen Z are making different lifestyle and work choices, or at least trying to. I don't know how successful it is, but they're trying to. But then the question is, where's that time? They're working less. Where's that time going? And it's not necessarily going on face-to-face relationships. It's often going on time spent online. And again, I don't want to be the science guy because that's not my background at all. But there's tons of research, again, that the relationships that make the difference are when we're face to face, we can feel each other's breath, sort of thing, not when you're separated by 100 miles and you're doing it through Facebook or whatever. So it is important. So what's changed is, I think, we have to put more work in now for all those reasons we've already discussed. Friendship used to be easy. We used to live where we grew up. We used to work near where we lived. There are all these third spaces we go to routinely, like church, like the bowling alleys, like the local baseball or whatever you're into. These things are disappearing, or we're choosing not to show up. So it's putting a lot of pressure on us to do the work of linking up with people, organizing meetups and all that stuff. And again, this was another big thing I found, is that I don't think men are brought up to be good at that stuff, right? If you think about in relationships, it's normally the wife that organizes all the dinners out with friends, like sends the cards at Christmas, phones up and check is so-and-so all right, arranges the holidays. If you extrapolate that to friendships, women are amazing in keeping in touch with each other and organizing stuff. Men often just let it drift and kind of look at each other across the ether and wait for the other guy to make the first move. So we're not match fit in terms of maintaining our friendships.
Man, that's a really great point, Max. I look at the rich relationships that I have, and I hadn't thought about this before. It's really because at various points there's always been a person in those circles that has said, "I'm doing a bike trip, let's go do this," or "We're going to go hunting, let's go do," or "You're going overlanding," or there's always a person who exhibits leadership. And if we're being passive males and no one's exhibiting leadership, then no one's going to be calling the troops together to do the thing, which is then how the friendships come. I hadn't thought about that before.
Yeah, I mean, that for me is one of the most important little changes you can make. So I spoke to this is a phrase I love, so I'll share it with you now. I spoke to a guy who I know, who's got loads of male friends. And he's the sort of guy that's always asked to be a best man with other guys. I said to him, "So how come, And I said, "Yeah, how come you got so many friends? What's going on?" He says, "Well, my friends, they call me the Sherpa." So the Sherpa is like the Nepalese soldier that carries all the stuff up the mountain for everyone else. They said they call me the Sherpa because I organize everything. But they said to me, "Steve, if you didn't organize everything, we'd never see each other." Right? And I just thought, what a great simple way of putting it. Be the Sherpa in your social group. Be the Sherpa in your life. Be the guy who does the heavy lifting. Like Ralph Waldo Emerson, he's been around for years. He put it the same way. The best way to have a friend is to be a friend. It's the same idea. But this is not complicated. But I think guys especially, we're not kind of socialized, brought up, however you want to define that, to do that work. And that was one of the major things I've been trying to work on, and one of the things that made the biggest difference, is be the guy who organizes stuff, show leadership. And I tell you what, guys love when you do that, because they're just waiting to be invited to do stuff. They're like, oh, please.
Dude, you're freaking ringing my bell. This is really, really fascinating. I wonder if one of the reasons my life is as rich as it is and my friendship pool is as deep as it is because I believe in doing things aggressively, which means I'm always the dude who's calling shit together. Hey, let's do this, let's do that. Like I'm figuring out where the elk hunt is. I'm figuring out where the bike trip is. The last Overland thing, I organized that. And it's not because I'm the guy who has to be in control or in charge. I love when somebody else does. Like my son, the bike trip that we do, he would always go with me and my friends when I did these adventure motorcycle trips. Now he invites me because he organizes it. And so there's one time I can go with him. It's really, really cool. But to your point here, I hadn't thought that one of the blessings of being aggressive and just doing things, initiating things, that's what aggression is, instigating things, initiating things, is my life is the richer for it. And if you're just freaking sitting around going, why is nobody asking me to, I don't have anybody to go ride motorcycle, I don't have anybody to go hunt with, it's a sign of passivity instead of blessing yourself with pushing yourself forward. Talk more.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think this is the language is important here. And like we're talking about men today. And I think men do respond to a certain sort of language, and they do get turned off by a certain form of language as well. So if they think, and you've kind of touched on this already in what you said earlier on, if they think it's all a bit soft and a bit sort of meh meh, they're going to go like, no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be the kind of softy, touchy feely guy necessarily. But this is about showing leadership. This is about being the guy that steps forward, shows leadership, and gets it done, and is aggressive. Like you say, not all the time, but I think if we can be as aggressive in our social lives as we are often in our work lives, in our whatever, if you compete in sports or whatever your vibe is, whatever your game is, then it makes a massive difference. And I don't think should be seen as a different category. Here's another thing I think is a big reason. So one of the biggest things that surprised me when I researched men's friendships was we think of friendships now, we think of relationships. What sex is regarded as the experts? If you kind of go do a kind of straw poll, they'll say it's women are good at this stuff, right? They're better. It's more natural for women. It's very sort of feminine thing to be relationally good. Now, you can argue that's right or wrong, but most people will say culturally that's what we think. But that's a very modern invention. If you go back to the 19th century, all the way back to the ancient Greeks, friendship was male. All the great friendships were male. Men were the friendship experts. Women, it was considered, didn't have the chops for it, emotionally or intellectually. Now, that was wrong as well. But now we've got this thing with relationships where it's all defined often in quite feminine, inverted commas, archetypally feminine terms. And that maybe turns men off and goes, it's not something they can own. But like words like aggression and leadership, more archetypally masculine phrases and language, I think can buy men into it. And actually we can take back ownership of this subject and of this of friendship, this word. Or if not ownership, at least co-own it,
Well, we've got these phrases in masculine culture as well. The rugged individualist, which is supposed to be manly and amazing. Or I've heard guys like themselves to a lone wolf. And I'm like, dude, you realize I've interacted with wolf experts in Montana. You realize that lone wolves are shorter, smaller than wolves in a pack, and they die sooner. So you're saying that you're weaker and you're going to die earlier as a lone wolf because you need a pack in order to bring down an elk. We have these phrases that make me feel more masculine, and no, it's not working for us.
Yeah, I think the idea that this is another reason why I think guys don't necessarily talk about this. So they hear, and actually, I've often felt like when I thought about doing the book, I was like, do I want to become the face of having no friends? Right? It's kind of a bit of a double-edged sword, right? And the reason why I thought, no, I'm just going to do it, I'm going to go for it, is I think a lot of men won't admit to the problem. Because to admit to the problem is to admit you have needs. It's to admit, like, I do need people in my life. I'm not enough alone. And to admit you have needs in a quite a masculine culture is seen as weak and as bad. And a lot of guys won't do that. So I think a lot of when this gets brushed on the carpet and guys are like, yeah, I've got loads of friends, it's because they're trying to protect themselves a bit. But then when you dig into it and go, okay, when was the last time you talked about a friend about anything other than basketball? Well, you know, who would you phone if your wife had just left you? Well, you know, then you go, well, maybe you haven't got as many friends as you think. So I think we need to open up this and change the language around friendship and loneliness, both in a masculine sense and also letting guys know that you don't have to like fit that strong and silent lone wolf archetype to be a real, again, inverted commas, man.
This could be a really stupid question, but I'll ask it anyway. Have you ever listened to the Joe Rogan podcast?
Yeah, I have. Yeah.
I have a theory on that. I listen to about, first of all, if you're into podcasting, you've got to listen to a couple episodes just because he's the king, right? I mean, he draws more people. More people listen to a 3-hour podcast and supposedly our short attention spans to a Joe Rogan podcast, 3 hours, some of them are 4, than watch ABC, NBC, and CBS combined. I mean, it's stunning. My theory, I'd like to know your take on this, but I'll ask you first. Do you have a theory as to why it's so big? I mean, why else would 3 out of 4 episodes be him getting high and talking about hallucinogens, which he's hyper big on? It's like, okay, God, 3 or 4 are there that many people that are interested in hearing some dudes drink with his friends? And what do you have an opinion? I do.
Yeah, I have an opinion, and I think the opinion is there's a couple of things. I think one is like a political position he has, which is against what we would call in the UK political correctness. And I'm sure there's a similar phrase in the US. You might even use the same one. But, you know, this idea that there's some subjects you shouldn't talk about and some language you shouldn't use and some topics that shouldn't be explored. But then to kind of connect it more to this conversation, I think there is, in terms of masculinity about the modern man, what Joe Rogan does is maybe an accessible version of being a new guy, which is to be curious, to be open-minded, to be a bit different from like the jocks that maybe we grew up with, but at the same time to not go all the way over to the other side, the kind of more touchy-feely, soft, what sometimes I call the new age guy, right? The kind of slightly in between, which I think a lot of men can connect to and relate to, but they don't want to go so far the other way. They don't want to be too feminine in the kind of the archetypal way you might define that phrase. So that's probably what I would say. I mean, what do you think? I mean, it's interesting. It's an open subject, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's all true what you say. I think also we got to. I just talked about it. 3 out of 4 episodes, getting talking drugs and getting high or doing drinks. I mean, that happens on a good number. But let's not forget he talks amazingly meaty concepts in a 3-hour block that you couldn't get anywhere. No one else is going to talk with Mark Zuckerberg for 3 hours and talk about everything from MMA to whatever. He's incredibly curious. I think everything he says right down the pike. And here's also what I think is going on. I think that the average American male is vicariously getting friendship from Joe Rogan. I think the average American male is listening to a conversation, and the average American male has 0 conversations, none, like nothing, has nothing. Interacting at work about a project, maybe bitching about something with somebody they know, but the average American has not having any conversation because they're incredibly lonely. And I think that show is so popular because people are tuning in, and they're getting the next best thing from having a real conversation. They're listening to one. That's what I think.
Yeah, there's a lot to that. I used to be a radio host in the UK, and I would do overnights, right? So kind of like the graveyard shift. And there's a real thing in radio where lonely people listen to it and they get vicarious friendship through it. They kind of delude themselves that there's it's a very intimate thing. Audio is a very intimate thing. Like if you're listening to this, you might be walking down the street. It's just us and you. It's very kind of an intimate medium. So it feels a bit like friendship. Also, I think, like sometimes when you read a book and you're like, oh, I really like these characters, I really get this kind of author, or you listen to a podcast, these kind of relationships are almost purer and more perfect than real life ones. And we don't like the messiness of the real life ones who are imperfect and the people are flawed, and we can't be selfish and just be transactional with them, just consume it and then literally switch it off. So I think that's another part of it. But then again, you're right. The question is if we're consuming content like that, is it a reason why people are not putting themselves out there more in order to have those conversations? If you can sit at home and replicate the feeling, although as we've explained, the kind of health and mental and happiness benefits of it are not the same, but you might delude yourself that they are. If you could have that experience, maybe that's one reason why you're not putting yourself out there anymore.
What is doing it to us? Like what? I think we're looking at lack of modeling. I think we're looking at. We already talked about lack of third space. I'm going to come back to that in a moment. Talking about maybe lack of valuing male friendships. Are there social pressures or messages you think that are in the water that we're soaking up as men? What do you think there's some cultural conspiracy going on here?
I mean, it's interesting when you say that. I don't know if there's a conspiracy, but I don't think we take male friendship seriously anymore. So to give you an example, a guy told me that he was going to go and have a beer after work with some guy in the office as a friend, and then a couple of them in the office said, "Oh, were you off on a man date?" And he's like, "No, I'm not on a man date." He says, "Why does this have to be compared to a sexual relationship? Why can't it just be a friendship?" It's because we don't take them seriously. When men are close, it's called a bromance,
right.
And they kind of think like, "Oh, it's kind of quite funny, bromance, kind of a play on romance." But again, it's subtly undermining it. And I think
fascinating.
The way men get together and bond, we maybe think is childish and silly. So guys go off on their bikes for a weekend, and it's like, oh, it's just like, what are you, kids? It's like, no, this is what male intimacy looks like. It doesn't look like female intimacy. Doesn't mean that it's not intimacy. So there's definitely that in terms of cultural. And then on the flip side of it is men do need some of those conversations or some of those relationships where they can have meaty conversations. They can show more of themselves, disclose more emotion. And I do think we are still brought up to not value male displays of emotion and to teach boys who eventually become men to repress a lot of their emotional side, to not show it. And that eventually translates into ways of being in friendships that are not conducive to closeness. There's definitely that as well.
That's really fascinating about the mandate and the bromance stuff. That I hadn't thought about before. That's really, really strong. So we've got those cues that are telling us, we kind of make fun of it when we see it. You're wasting time going out and doing X, Y, Z. You're wasting money by spending time in your hobby, money in your hobby. That's really strong. That's strong. I've been thinking with some friends of mine, guys I meet together with on Thursday mornings.
Yeah.
And the friendship actually started around the thing that we were doing was trying to help entrepreneurs. We did a little round table or presentation for entrepreneurs, trying to connect entrepreneurs. That's still going, but it's a separate nonprofit that's doing that now. So these guys, we're still basically getting together, but we're not doing a lot of initiating entrepreneurial stuff, but they're entrepreneurs. And so we've been thinking maybe our next thing, because just guys sitting and having coffee in the morning, it's meaningful. It's very meaningful, but we've got to do something together. So one of the things we've been thinking about is creating the next third space. What's the next Elks Club, the next softball league, all that. And I'm sharing this not because I'm afraid of losing our idea. I would love someone to take this idea and just take it, run with it. I don't really want to do it, but we're just wondering, like, okay, maybe we create this thing, this next space. Before I tell you some of my thoughts on it, do you have any thoughts of like what would be a classic third space that would attract men, that would facilitate friendships?
Absolutely. So I can tell you about the most successful initiative worldwide to deal with this problem, and it's aimed at slightly older guys than maybe guys in their 30s or 20s, but it's men's sheds, and it comes out of Australia. So the Australians were in like local governments kept on putting on initiatives to try and get lonely old folks to come out, right, and meet people, and they would have like coffee mornings, And guess what? Loads of women would show up, and they kept going, "Where are all the guys?" And the guys wouldn't show up. And eventually, this slightly combative Australian says, "Well, no wonder men aren't showing up. Men don't want to sit around and have a chin wag and a coffee necessarily. What they want to do is they want to make stuff. They want to build stuff, fix stuff." So they started a thing called men's sheds, and men would literally show up and they'd make stuff, or they'd fix like pepper grinders. They'd make whatever they want to make in their workshop. So a shed is like a workshop. They'd have cups of tea around it, and it was massively successful. But here's the key thing, right? Is that it had a pretense to it. So I went to one in the UK just kind of see how it was, and there was a few guys in the workshop doing stuff, but most of them were sat around the table having a conversation. But what they needed was a reason to get together, and men don't have that reason. They won't show up. So a third space that works is one that you provide an activity, but what you don't do is lead with things like the word loneliness or health. If you go to men's shed, they don't mention that stuff. It maybe come out as a natural byproduct, but they kind of go like, "Look, guys, what are you interested in? Come and do it." So that as a third space really does work. It's been proven all over the world as like a concept. I bet there's tons in the States as well.
No, there's not. No, there's not any in the States. No, because it's fascinating. Really? I've never heard of shed. I've never heard the shed at all. Never. No, but that's exactly what we're working on. Like a place that will be completely outfitted with car lifts and tools, and there would be a guy there with his car, and you could watch him do his car. You could help him. I'm rehabbing a Jeep CJ7 right now. Plenty of times I need an extra hand. You can hang out, whatever. Where there be clinics you'd put on, like how to drywall, how to do that. Yeah. And of course, just like you said, you got tables around, guys doing beers and stuff. We're very, very early on this. We just got together with a bunch of we're all in our, I'm in my 50s. I think the youngest guy in the group is 38, 30, 35. So we just got together with a bunch of 20-somethings to pick their brains. So interesting. I didn't. Shame on me for not knowing that was a huge thing in New Zealand and England. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, your idea sounds great as well. I think, again, it's about showing leadership and doing something about it, and understanding that this stuff can be fun as well. Like, I don't want people to hear this conversation and think that this is kind of a depressing conversation and it has to be, I think the word loneliness is not right. It's about juice. It's about life. It's about fun. And it's about, maybe aggression is another great word here to throw into that mix. That's what friendship's about. And so how can you produce context where that's likely to happen and where you can encourage it?
Talk about your research that unearthed Dunbar's research around the percentages of people we should be spending time with. How many friends should I have? Like, people say to me sometimes, "Well, who's your best friend?" I go, I can't define a best friend. I could define a few that I would call no matter what, and I would spend as much time. I can't define a best friend. Should I have a best friend? Should I have 3 friendships I'm pouring into? Should I have 15, 20? I mean, what's the manageable amount?
Okay, so I would say there's no right answer. There's no shoulds in friendship. But I mean, what you're saying is actually a really good representation of the difference between men and women with best friends. So again, this comes out of Robin Dunbar's research, Dr. Robin Dunbar. So we mentioned him briefly already. But again, another thing he looked at was women tend to have one BFF, one best friend, right, who they often know more closely than often their partner, their romantic partner. Whereas if you ask men to name a best friend, they often won't name one person, they'll name 3 or 4. It's like a kind of a tier of people. So that's the difference there. But in terms of numbers of friends, so Dr. Robin Dunbar is most famous for this thing called Dunbar's number. And Dunbar's number is essentially an estimate of the maximum number of stable relationships a human being can maintain at any one time. Now, what limits this number? It's time, but it's also literally the size of our brain. So it came out of comparing primates. So why do us as humans have bigger brains than monkeys? It turns out it's because we can manage a bigger social group. So this number, Dunbar's number, is 150. So on average, human beings will have 150 friendships. Now, they won't all be of the same closeness. And if you look inside that number, you have an inner circle of 5 of your closest, might be your closest family members, closest friends. Then outside of that, there's another 10 people, which are the next closest. Outside of that, then another 15 people up to 25. Then it goes out, doubling as it moves to 50 to 150. And these circles, what's really interesting is it's very mathematical in terms of how often you have to see these people to maintain that level of closeness. Now, the actual specifics of how often you'd have to see someone in your 5 compared to your 50 layer, it's in the book. I can't remember it off the top of my head. But it's a really interesting theory that our social world is not just about time. It's also literally about how many relationships we can manage given the size of our brains.
Well, I think this is probably why the female narrative has become the dominant narrative, and now we're looking at friendships only through a female lens. So, you got to just go and sit and talk with each other, which is great. But men tend to not do that, most of us. And you have to have a best friend. You have to have, and so even guys talk about this. Like, my wife is my best friend. My wife's not my best friend. There are things that, first of all, I'm a Christian, so biblically, I believe that my wife and I are one, that we got married. God made us one. We are one flesh. Friend is too low of a term for what she is, where she's one with me. Secondly, friends can innately understand what's going on with you. There's some things as a guy that my wife, she's understanding, and she's very empathetic and smart woman, but she doesn't innately understand the draw of pornography on a computer, for instance. She doesn't innately understand a need to be productive. At least I, as a type A male, I need to be productive. I mean, I need, my friends need to get, the friends I have need to understand those kind of things. But even just saying that, like, she's not my best friend, people look at me and I feel like you're judging me. I can see you're judging me. My marriage is 32 years. It's probably better than yours. Stop judging me. But there's narratives that we just put on us,
Absolutely. And there's connected here is that the way marriage has been understood has massively changed in the modern world, whereas we're meant to invest everything in our spouse, right? Which is so absolutely our emotional home, our physical home, everything, all in one person. That puts a lot of pressure on them. It's unrealistic. And also, like you say, we need different avenues, whether it be male versus female, or like the point of Friends is that we're not one dimensional. And a bit like that thing with C.S. Lewis, like ABC, different people will bring out different sides of us. We do need that selection of people and don't want just one person. Now, a lot of people listening to this might say, hang on, this bloke has just written a book about finding a best man, and now he's saying you shouldn't have just one friend. This is maybe, again, connected to why we shouldn't get too tied up in the tradition of this stuff, is that historically the best man was a ritual that you had, and it's an honor you bestow on someone. But for me, the book and the story and the whole issue is not about finding someone to fill that role, to tick a box, to like be the guy with one close friend. It was a door into a broader look at myself and look at men and look at this wider problem. So I think that's important to say. But I'm really glad you brought up the kind of how friendship as a man sits with your marriage. I mean, it's a real tension there, I think.
Well, tell us, did you find a best man or did you find best men?
So I spent 2 years trying to solve this problem, and I had a huge choice of guys to choose. But in the end, and this is a twist, I chose not to have a best man. I actually had 2 best women, because I concluded that even after all this and fixing my male friendships, the 2 closest friends I had in the world were female. And I just thought, rather than just honoring the kind of the tradition just for the sake of it, I was going to honor the kind of reality. Now, this for me was not a surrender at all, because I could have had a man if I wanted. I had like 3 groomsmen, my brother and 2 great friends. But I decided, I wanted to honor Philippa and Hope, who did that job. And that for me is the thing, is that, again, we don't just have to do what everyone's done forever. Male friendship is a massive part of my life now, but you don't just have to be friends with men. You can be friends with women. You don't just have to have your wife as your best friend. It can be a guy, a woman, whatever. We need those different outlets. But that was the twist at the end of the tale, Brian.
So how does your relational life look different now than how long you've been married? When did you get married?
Got married on November the 26th, 2021. So coming up to, well, about 9 months.
Okay.
Yeah, 9 months. Almost a year.
So what does your schedule, your checkbook, your just rhythms, how do they look differently? How do they look now as you're prioritizing friendship, male friendship, than 2 years ago?
I'm sending a lot more messages, arranging meetups with male friends. I'm the one who goes first to sort it out. Tomorrow, I'm spending all day at the cricket, which is a very English, boring sport for an American listener, with 2 male friends. On Friday night, I'm seeing a male friend. Sunday night, I'm seeing a male friend. I have this regular, every fortnight, we get together and play 5-a-side soccer, a group of guys, then we go and have a beer afterwards. I run this thing called Pub Club once a month. I book out a room in a bar.
Wow.
I text everyone in my phone book, say, come along for a drink or no drinks, whatever you want. And I think this is this thing that men say to each other often is, we must have a drink sometime. We must have a coffee sometime or whatever. And then they never do it. So I say, when the last person you said that to, bring them along. I've done all the work, all the organizing, just show up. So that's an example of some of the things I'm doing.
That's fantastic.
But I think friendship has a rhythm, and I'm back in the rhythm.
Dude, that's fantastic. This is such an appropriate topic for the aggressive life, and you're just a perfect guest on the aggressive life, because that's what you're doing. You're doing it. You're setting it up. You're initiating it. It is amazing. The passivity in males, and our loneliness is a function of our passivity, not just because I'm not initiating, but no one else is initiating for me either. When I bump into old friends or people I used to spend a lot of time with, this is the way it goes all the time. I interact. Oh, how you doing? It's great to see you. Good. We should hang out. I said, yeah. And I always say this. Am I calling you after, or you call me? They say, I'll call you. I say, great. They never call me. Maybe they're just lying. You know, maybe they don't want to spend time with me, and that's their way to get me off their back. But I just find that we're just too passive. We don't follow through on things, and so you've really pushed us well, Max. Well done. Anything you want to talk about that we haven't talked about so far?
I don't think so. I mean, maybe the thing I end the book on is 3 very simple rules that literally anyone can follow, which was show up when asked, go first when you're not asked, and keep going even when it's tough, right? So we talked about being aggressive, not being passive. Sometimes the world ain't going to play ball. Sometimes the guys are going to be rubbish and not get back to you, not text back, not show up at the thing you've organized. You can't just quit on the first time it gets tricky. You've got to keep going. And those 3 simple rules, if you follow them, you'll be pretty much there when it comes to male friendship, I think.
Max, where can people find your book, find your thoughts? Man, you just had some great stuff for us. How can we follow up with your great English mind and hear more of your English accent? Throw them another shrimp on the barbie. I guess that's Australia. That's not England.
That's Australia.
Yeah, that's right.
We'll have some prawns in the oven, though. You can find me at my website, Max Dickins, Dickins, not ENS, like Charles, the writer, unfortunately. If you've been wondering the whole podcast, is this guy related to Charles Dickens? I'm not. I'm on Twitter as well, at Max Dickins. The book is called Billy No Mates, How I Realized Men Have a Friendship Problem. It's an audio book, which I read. It's on ebook and hardback, paperback as well. If you read it, get in touch and let me know what you think.
Brother, it's been great having you on. Love to do it again sometime. Write another book so I can. Actually, you don't have to write a book. I'd have you on. You were just a joy to have on. A lot of great information, and I got to listen to that sexy English accent for an hour. It was wonderful. So, hey guys, guys, women, ladies, if you're listening, maybe this will help you understand your man a little bit more. You understand your husband. Maybe this will also help you understand that you're heading in the right direction if you're a female with friendships. But here's the deal, man. Here's the deal. It's called the aggressive life. It's not the interesting thought life. You got to leave this podcast and you got to freaking call somebody. You got to initiate something, or you're going to be just as lonely tomorrow as you were yesterday. You're not going to be as relationally vibrant. You've got to put something into action here. So make the call, send the email, organize the event, and get the blessings coming out of it. We'll see you next time on The Aggressive Life. Hey, thanks for listening. for all things aggressive living, why don't you head over to briantome.com. Find my new book, Move, a guide to get up and go forward, as well as articles and much, much more. And no matter where you listen to podcasts, why don't you take a second and leave us a rating, leave us a review. It really, really helps us drive new listeners to the show. We want to help as many people as possible, just like we may have helped you. We want to help others. So why don't you help us out? And if you want to connect, find me on Instagram at Brian Tome. The Aggressive Life with Brian Tome is a production of Crossroads Church, Cincinnati, Ohio.